Welcome, everyone. This is the Innovation Law Club Africa podcast. And as you know, we'll bring to you very interesting persons across the continent. I'm doing some of the most interesting works around innovation, having some of the most current conversations about how to build sustainable products to solve Africa's most interesting problems. But most importantly, having conversations with thought leaders who are driving those important conversations about what the future of Africa should look like. I'm Tola Onayemi. I'm an international trade and investment lawyer. I worked on the negotiation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I've advised a number of tech startups around the continent on whether investing or raising capital, and basically just walked around helping build innovation. And today I've got with me someone I'm particularly interested and excited to be interviewing, not just because of who he is also, but also because of the interesting things he's done on the continent, and also because of the interesting thing that his company that represents has also done on the continent. I've got with me Komba Malukutila. How are you, Komba?
Thanks, Tola. You almost got it. It's Komba Malukutila.
Goodness, I was taking a bet on that. I just lost one Bitcoin.
No, it's fine. You wouldn't be the first, and you certainly are not going to be the last. But yeah, it's Komba Malukutila.
Malukutila, I got that now. Komba Malukutila. I should have done that a minute ago, but that's fine. Komba is the managing director for FinTech for MTN Zambia. Komba, do you want to just give us a minute of introduction about yourself so that those who are listening for the first time, which I doubt, but we're just listening in, can have some context?
No, I mean, thank you so much, Tola, and to the entire team at ILCA. I think you guys are definitely doing a fantastic job at bringing light to innovation, but with particular interest on FinTech. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share our story and indeed share my story and journey with MTN FinTech. So my name is Komba Malukutila, and I look after FinTech on behalf of MTN. I've actually been with MTN for 12 years now and held, various portfolios within the business from technology, because I obviously come from a technology background, so mainstream technology, and then moved up into marketing in a more product-based environment, and then looked after enterprise business on behalf of MTN Zambia, and until my eventual placement as the managing director for FinTech for Zambia. So I've pretty much started out my career in MTN. I did a few short stints before that, but it's been a 12-year interesting career with Africa's giant telecom. We are technically the biggest telecom business across the continent. So
throw that in.
A very big privilege to be part of this very interesting giant family.
Fantastic. And I think it's a great time to flag here that this will be the first year anniversary since your appointment as the managing director for MTN. Yeah, you were appointed February 2020. So that's like a big deal. I think we can say congratulations. It's been 1 year of running that, and the board is still happy with you. So that's a fantastic place to be, right? To be driving change across the continent. So let's jump in quickly. What is it like to be the managing director of FinTech at MTN Zambia? What's your everyday like? Do you wake up like the rest of us and pick up your phone first? Do you have to text? Do you have to text your kids back? Like, what does your day-to-day look like as the MD FinTech for MTN Zambia?
All right, thanks, Tola, for that question. So it's interesting times that we are operating in as a start. I mean, typically, what the day is supposed to look like is I get up, prepare for the day. So whether it's gym, I like to work out in the mornings, and then, kick off what a work day would look like in the office. We're working in interesting times with COVID. So your day would typically start and end at home on days when you're not visiting the trade or you're not in the market. So we're working from home. I think we are in a zone that we're calling the red zone, based on certain matrices, which then determines whether you're able to work in the office or up to a certain capacity. But for Zambia, if you've been following the cases quite closely, then you know that we're in our second wave of COVID. We've had an escalated number of cases and a considerable number of mortalities as well as a result. So priority number one is obviously to manage the spread and look out for the well-being of our members of staff, and hence trying to almost 100% work from home. So a typical day in my life would be around trying to manage the business, but remotely. There are opportunities that we take to obviously look after our extended partners in trade, our agents, our merchants. And from time to time, you have to mask up and go and see how our frontliners and front members of staff are doing in supporting the business, because really those are the real heroes of our business. The people who don't have the privilege to work from the comfort of their homes, you still need to make sure that you look out for them, look out for their safety, and how they're also interacting with customers in the new normal that we are operating in. So it's interesting times. We need to support adequately a aggressively growing business, but in lieu of COVID-19.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Komba. So you said something that I'm just going to stretch out a bit. You talked about fast growth. You're the manager of possibly the fastest growing division at MTN Zambia while tracking. And that's why I said the board is happy with you in your first year anniversary, right? What does that look like, right? How complex and demanding and that? And I think I'll just zeroing down, because those listening to this are probably people who are working around the whole issues of startups or working around innovation. What for you has been your biggest productivity hack? What one thing can you say has helped you figure out that fast growth productivity? Because when you're in a fast growth environment, you're, like they say, you're moving fast and breaking things, right? So what would you say is your greatest productivity hack? And how do you function? What helps you ensure that you don't lose sight of anything?
Okay, good. I'll quickly get into it. Number one is you are nothing without a good team. So one of my biggest mantras is around assembling a productive team, high performance teams. The FinTech business is quite a complex business, and I'll give you some insights into how we operate. All right. We are right now chasing the 5 million mark, RGS 90 customers on mobile money. This is actively transacting customers within 90 days. We're chasing 5 million customers. That's big for a population of about 17 to 18 million people. So that exponential growth, just to give you some context, last year this time, that number was about 3 million, and now we're chasing about 5 million. So that's considerably north of 40% growth on a year-on-year. In addition to the customer growth, we are also supporting over 50,000 agents in our trade. The agent's role in our ecosystem is to ensure that sufficient liquidity is available for our customers to be able to deposit money and withdraw money in their accounts as they please. Beyond that, we also have technology partners who obviously bring advanced services and solutions to our customers, which then makes it what you have been referring to as a FinTech. We've got quite a mature and diverse ecosystem as MTN and MTN Zambia. We are offering everything from lending to remittance to community savings to the traditional send and receive money. So quite a number of services in our bouquet of services. So how do you make sure that you support the partners adequately, you support the customer service adequately, and you also support merchants? Because in the wake of COVID-19, what also became apparent to us is that people are also quite skeptical to deal with cash. So you are now also supporting merchants who are collecting via mobile money, collecting their monies electronically. So how do you support that entire ecosystem? And that is growing quite massively, 40%, north of 40% year-on-year growth across all the different pillars that I've just described. What you need is an able team and an able support structure. So I'm just the ambassador. I'm speaking to you right now. but I'm working on the back of a very solid team and a very good group support structure. Because I think one thing that MTN invested in quite nicely and makes this role for me quite exciting is that we get quite a good support from our group FinTech team.
Fantastic. So two things you've said that I would flag again is the team. I liked what you said. You said I'm just the ambassador you're speaking to. There's a big team behind me and the support. And that's what makes people like to deal with people like you, right? Knowing that you're recognizing everyone was putting in effort, everyone was showing up, everyone was driving the entire process. I mean, that's fantastic. But let me ask you a question that I care deeply about, right? And I've been waiting to get to this question for a long part of the entire conversation. You said you've been with MTN for about 10 to 12 years, right? So you've been there for over
thereabouts.
Yeah. And now, as of today, the popular dictate or the popular mantra is go start your own company, be a startup founder, be an entrepreneur, start your own thing, right? That's the cool right now, right? You don't see, and the reason I think is that you don't find a lot of young persons who've started from any organization that is big and have risen through the ranks to become very successful at such a young age. So you've risen from joining as an application manager to becoming the managing director of an entire division in MTN Zambia and gained experience along the way. And you're still very young, right? So the question is, what's the secret sauce? What's the guiding principle? How do you approach work? What has helped you achieve so much at such a young age? What should be the act be? So if I want to become something like that, or if anyone is listening as an organization and wants to achieve the same degree of success at a young age in one organization, what should they be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I get the question quite a lot. So
I bet I'll
tell you. Yeah, I get it quite a lot. First of all, it's God. I'm Christian, so I don't believe that anything just comes to be. I think God is also at the center forward of everything that I do. So I stay very grounded in faith. But to complement what God is already putting together in my life is in Zambia, we have a saying that it takes a village, and I think it's really an African proverb. It takes a village to grow a man. So at every stage in my career, there's always been people who have been very supportive, and there's an accountability on you, the person who requires the support, to identify the right kind of stepping stones to take you to where you're going. And along the way, as you are going up, obviously, you've also got to pull up others. And it makes such a very interesting cycle as you are going. So there were very critical and instrumental people at every stages of my career who really helped, sort of bump me up and give me the right kind of guidance and coaching as to where I was going. I started out my career in the back office in MTN. In technology, pure mainstream IT. I was a engineer programming, but I think what was very interesting is I was quite clear about the fact that the IT space was probably the most relevant space in an MNO, but it was the most thankless job that I ever had in MTN because no one appreciates the IT guy. So I had such a very big passion for customer service and customer experience, but unfortunately would not be given the opportunity to actually see how the customers were consuming and experiencing the products that we were putting together and delivering on behalf of the business or the commercial functions. So I really, really wanted to leapfrog and get myself to the frontier and see how the customers are actually consuming the services that we are putting together. And so that's what really started sort of take a shift of my career from being mainstream technology, mainstream IT, into having sort of a hybrid of my IT skills and the commercial aspect of the business. And there were very, very instrumental people along the way who helped make that a reality. For the most part, was my line managers, was to understand at every point at which I had a line manager, what were their goals and ambitions and inambitions to get to where they want to take their department, and sort of position myself to supporting them to get to where they're going, whilst making it very clear where I also wanted to land up, whether within the business or from a career perspective. So that it made a very good symbiosis. Be of relevance to the people who you're working with, and they'll be of relevance to help you also get to where you want to get to eventually. So in a nutshell, is the people around you, you need to be very relevant, and you also have to have clarity of thought about where you eventually want to end up, and then work your way backwards from that. There's no surprises, and there's no free lunch. You actually have to put in the work. But that's sort of the angle in which I worked with and who had been very supportive of getting me to where I am today. So thank you so much for that question.
So I'm going to ask, two questions come to mind almost immediately, right? As a follow-up to your question. And I'm struggling which one to say, but I'll start with the other one. So the question of mentorship and dealing with mentors and dealing with sponsors and dealing with managers and all that question. So I'll just ask it very directly. What has been your biggest, and I said, and I want you to answer from two perspectives. One, from somebody who has gone from the back office to the front office, but secondly, as somebody who now also has to mentor a lot of people coming up, right? And I said that because it happens a number of times. People reach out to me and say, I need your mentorship on this. So what for you has been the two biggest tricks that you think has become important for one, coming up in dealing with people that are ahead of you, and also now that you're helping people come along, the two things you're looking out for the most when people come up to you and say, oh, mentor me or reach out to me?
Okay. So maybe I'll start with the other side that is not so focused on me and maybe focus on the teams that the teams that I get to work with. You see, one of the most important things is to understand that everybody has strengths. And as a leader, it's your responsibility to help cultivate the strengths of your team. And so you have to be very deliberate about coaching. And it's in very practical things. You have to help diagnose your team, understand the complexities that you're dealing with in terms of people, because not everybody is the same. And then add value to the members of the team that you are working with by, number one, understand what their personal goals are. Where does the team member want to actually end up? And then beyond that is, how do you then help them channel the strengths that they have to contribute to their goals and ultimately to the goals of the company? You need to recruit people and work with people whose personal goals are in alignment with the goals of the organization. Then you're going to see so much value. If you're working with somebody within a fintech space whose goals are ultimately to work in a law firm, you have to quickly steer them on that path of going to work in the law firm. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting both the time of the person who you're working with and the organization. So you really, really need to take time in understanding people. Building high performance teams is just that. It's a lot of coaching, it's a lot of guidance, it's a lot of support, there's a lot of taking personal interest in the teams and the people who you're working with. People are very investment based. If you invest in them, they will invest back in you, simply put. If you establish a relationship with them where they feel that you're constantly just taking and you're not plowing back, they'll also treat you the same. You get a very 8 to 5 type of person. And you know that in the environment that we work, especially telecoms, that type of attitude and investment does not yield much benefit. So that investment from leaders, unfortunately, we don't do as much as we're supposed to be doing, but there is a big onus in investing in our people. Then I'm going to speak into the reverse, which partly contradicts what I would have said, or partly contradicts and complements what I would have said is, you as the person who's requesting mentorship, you need to reach out because it's a pyramid at the top. So you've got very few mentors and very many people who require mentorship. So if you don't reach out for that mentorship, you don't reach out for the support, you will not get the support you require. You don't have to operate in an environment and expect a certain level of entitlement that your line manager is automatically just going to identify you and catapult you to the next level. You have to make sure that you reach out to your mentor, that you schedule your interactions for your progress. Every time I saw somebody schedule those interactions and schedule feedback and schedule progress with their mentor or mentee, something happened out of that. You need to attach equal importance to mentorship as you attach to the work that you do. So You've got to seize the opportunity with your line manager. You've got to work on yourself, and then you've got to run that race as hard as you can. You have to put in the work, unfortunately. And for someone growing up and working in an environment that I did, I worked with many people who were much older, in many cases, much more experienced than I was at the role. And you find yourself that suddenly you are a head of department or you're a managing director looking after people who are much senior than you. And the only way you would influence a team like that is by working harder. You have to sleep less. You've got to put in the work. People don't work for people who don't inspire them. So in order for you to impact that inspiration, to show that inspiration, to cultivate that inspiration in your team, you have to put in the work. They need to see why you were made the managing director. It's not the title alone, it's in the output. So you've got to make sure that you read, you check on what trends are happening, you put in the work, you fold your sleeves and actually put in the work. If they are putting together a project and they are staying overnight, stay with them and give guidance where necessary. When they see that, they're also motivated to put in the work at the extra mile. I have a boss of mine who was my previous boss, is Charles Malapisi, who always used to say to me, it's less crowded at the extra mile. When you go the extra mile, you inspire your team.
I like that one. It's less crowded at the extra mile. That's a good one. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to put it on a shirt. Yeah. So, Komba, and this conversation, I'm paying that it's a podcast. I wish it was a stage diet because there's so many questions that I want to keep you, but I'll stretch out the next one, right? Which is, so you said something very important, right? You moved from the back office, you got interested in the conversations around how customers are interfacing with the product, the UI issues, the UX issues, and then you somehow started doing customer-facing work. And that's important, right? For example, someone was there to advise countries in negotiating the AFCFTA to even tech startups and the rest. One of the things you find out is that when people are thrown into those kind of positions in the middle of it, picking up those skills take a lot of time because you're fixing the car while the car is moving, right? You're having to pick up skills for customer-facing work while also trying to do the work. So that's a quick question. How did you cultivate that? Because it involved new set of skills, right? How did you cultivate those new skills for customer facing, even for management, right? They say that some of the big tech CEOs make the worst managers, right? Make the worst managers of people, right? So how did you pick up those two skills, the customer facing type, understanding how to build our products, but the second part of being a good manager, knowing how to deal with people, knowing how to allocate resources properly and all that. How did you figure? How did you also get to the point where you were not overly invested in? Because that's another thing with tech people, right? I have to work with them every other day, advising them on shipping out or expanding across the country. I think I'm probably the leading person helping businesses expand across the continent right now. And that happens every time. You get so invested in the product that they're not willing to ship out a product that customers like. Instead, they're trying to ship out a product that they're invested in. So how did you navigate all those kind of issues as somebody who was coming from a technical background to a more management resource allocation point of view?
It's a very good question. So I'll start with the customer. What the customer needs, you will know if you actually listen to the customer. It's probably the easiest person to serve because their needs changing all the time, but they're not shy to tell you what they actually want if you listen. I'd like to take it back to MTN, that MTN takes a lot of deliberate effort in listening to the customer and being very customer-centric. So we get a lot of feedback from customers, but in a very structured way. We carry out all these surveys, we get the information, and then once we have the information in, it then translates into what our plans for the customer actually come from. So we've got a very bottom-up approach as opposed to top-bottom approach when it comes to addressing customer needs. And we tend to be quite dynamic in that process as well. If a trend is going a certain way, for example, and you would have put in so much investment to take it in another way based on maybe what the market would have informed you of before, you quickly need to respond to what the customers are saying. So that support structure is definitely there. You really just need to make sure that you listen and go with a very bottom-up approach in terms of what customers actually require. I'll give you an example COVID and what happened last year. So, I mean, last year, this time is when we're really getting the news of the fact that there is a pandemic and it's going to hit and so on and so forth. What we realized is that it was going to send customers into a panic. And during this time, a lot of people will be very uncomfortable to interact, number one. And as we saw it, we had then lockdowns and everybody was suddenly working from home and so on and so forth. We had planned at a point that we're going to put in e-commerce solutions that people will be able to buy products and services from home and so on and so forth. Maybe for a time like 2021, where we're planning to have our sort of e-commerce marketplace platform. But the market demanded it. And suddenly people wanted to pay via mobile money. And that's on the back of which the growth that I was telling you, we opened a subscriber base of about 3 million and close to about 4.5 now, stretching to a 5 million mark. We had to listen to what customers needed. And so we leapfrogged a lot of the stuff that we had planned for over maybe a 2 to 3 year period, we had to do in a year. Is now we had to go and check with the logistic companies, are you able to deliver food and groceries to someone's doorstep? Yes, we can. What do you need? We need a payments platform to be able to collect the payments from the customer. All right, so we'll provide that. Suddenly, we had our open API that in a matter of 24 to 48 hours, somebody will be able to integrate their app or their USSD technology into mobile money. And from the comfort of someone's home, they would click a button, order their lunch, and in a matter of 30 minutes, is delivered to their doorstep. Mm-hmm. That is what consumers are like. Depending on the environment, they'll be dynamic and it will require for you to implement changes. There are many MNOs who up to today are not able to enable payments. And so you have to listen and you have to respond accordingly. We worked very closely with the Zambian regulator almost in the week or two of COVID actually dropping. Actually, it was when we're hearing it of in other countries and the cases escalating. Before we had actually reported the first case in Zambia. We were the first MNO who went to see the regulator to make them aware of the opportunity for us to zero rate sending and receiving money via mobile money to ease the flow of cash within the ecosystem. And we zero rated that within 48 hours of receiving the approval from the regulator, and suddenly transaction volumes within our ecosystem had increased. That is the agility that you need to implement when there is a need for solutions. So you can imagine
innovation is agility.
We obviously had a business plan for 2021. It was already written down what we were supposed to do. None of these solutions were top of the agenda. But because the market demanded and the consumers had a need, we had to rise to the occasion.
Komba, there's so much to ask you. Like you're spitting fire, right? So you just gotta and you give your interview is giving me a lot more context, right? And I have a number of questions to ask. So, but I'm going to join two of them together very quickly, right? So you just got appointed MD of FinTech, and then COVID hits, right? Someone's going to say, oh, my village people have come from me. That's the worst time to be appointed as the MD FinTech, right? Because COVID just hit. Now, I want to ask a question about regulators, because you flagged it, right? So I want to ask a question about moving fast in tech companies, but I'll come back to that in a minute. And I want to ask a question about groupthink. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think my question now is, you got appointed. You were not like you were C-suite, but like you were not the MD of an entire operation, right? Yes. And then now you're getting that appointment. Now you have to deal with the regulator. So you're learning that dealing with regulators, and at the same time having to deal with regulators. What for you, and that's basically like being a startup founder, right? You're building a product and at the same time having to deal with the regulator. One, what's been your experience with regulators? Two, how have you helped regulators understand issues that they might not have an incentive to understand? So e.g., in this case, you're telling them, drop your revenue to ensure there's growth in the sector, right? That's something that not every regulator would understand, because most regulators think in line of revenue and income and all that. So that's two. But the third part to it is, what's been your what for you has been the most interesting way you've thought about how to engage regulators to ensure that they understand what you're trying to do and they're supporting you, even if they don't understand the industry? When you're doing innovation where the regulation hasn't even caught up yet, right? And the general idea for regulators is to push against it because they don't understand it yet. How do you navigate that terrain with regulators?
Good question. And I know the regulator will be watching this podcast.
Hey, regulators, keep this part.
I better mind what I say. These career limiting questions.
Regulator, if you're listening, keep this part. But I'm
going to answer it as honestly as possible. Okay. And to be quite honest, the Zambian Central Bank, which is our regulator for FinTech, as you would expect, is a very supportive regulator. We've got a regulator that's almost like a friend, you know. They have been the biggest driver of financial inclusion in Zambia.
Wow.
Way before our mobile money discussions started, whether it's ours or the competitions. They have been driving this agenda for over a decade now. In fact, the Financial Inclusion Act was commissioned by Her Excellency, the First Lady, the Vice President of Zambia, about 5 to 6 years ago. And she together with the central bank, have been driving this mandate for financial inclusion in Zambia. So we are really piggybacking off that act, which clearly indicates a very big need for Zambians to be financially included. So when you've got a regulator who is positioning themselves more as a friend and a support structure for you, an enabler for you, it makes our job from a regulatory perspective very easy. We get summoned by the regulator, at least on a quarterly basis, to check just how the business is going and to understand what trends are going on. They tend to be quite engaged. So on a quarterly basis, we sit around the table and we discuss the prospects of the business. One of the support that came in, I'll tell you typically, when COVID broke, was that the regulator actually called us in to try and sit us around between ourselves and the banks. I mean, it was quite an interesting discussion. It didn't matter whether you were from MTN, competition, the banks. We all sat around the table and say, guys, what is it that we can do to not waste a good crisis? This is an opportunity for us to leapfrog financial inclusion. How are we going to use each other's channels to make sure that our grandmothers in the villages, our support staff, our citizens in general can use this as an opportunity to leapfrog and all be financially included? And we all sat around the room and started to contribute as to what initiatives we felt could work. And I kid you not, no initiative went unimplemented, and they saw to it up to today. They increased the limits on the wallet for transacting via mobile money, almost double or triple during COVID, because more people needed to carry out now financial transactions. They sanctioned the zero rating of sending and receiving money up to a certain limit via mobile money, so that more people could be able to send money to each other at no additional charges. All that was supported by the regulator. So the constant communication is very key. The transparency in terms of the challenges that you're experiencing with the regulator is very key. They then understand how that impacts the economy, it impacts your business as a whole, and makes your conversations a whole lot more easier. So you have to constantly engage the regulator. There have been times when obviously we'll have those very difficult conversations. Just most recently, the regulator have been pushing a very big agenda for all the MNOs and the banks to interoperate via our national financial switch. And the pace at which they wanted it to happen, some of the MNOs and the banks were not ready, even just from a technology perspective. But they understood that the market needed interoperability, that the only way to get things going was if we could interoperate in a seamless manner. So whilst we appreciated and understood the drive for this, we had some technology gaps, obviously, to meet the demand, because this now needed to be accelerated in the wake of COVID as well. We rose to the occasion, but ultimately, we've seen an influx of transaction volumes now that interoperability is fully possible between MNOs, banks, and other PSPs. So their motives are always in good faith. Sometimes they may want you to execute things at a faster pace than you can even possibly from a technology perspective, but they won't also give you those kind of mandates minus the right kind of support structures in place. So we do appreciate. And I know that the landscape is not similar in most African territories, but I think us as the MNOs play a very big part at making sure that we sensitize the regulator of our environment.
Thank you so much for that, Komba. Thank you so much. I feel like we have to do another podcast because there's so many questions that I need to ask you that I haven't even got into, right? I feel like we need to do a number of more times. But and I think I like something you said, which I think it's most important, right? You talked about how the special role that big organizations and big corporates have to play in developing the market is actually communicating with the regulators and sensitizing the regulators, right? So, because the general prevailing idea is that just avoid the regulators, be under their radar, ensure they don't see you, right? But you saying
never works.
Exactly. But you saying things like, while tech startups might want to avoid them because they're small, if you're a big corporate and you're already visible, rather different conversation from a small tech startup, having a constant communication, that is very helpful. I'll take the next question, Komba. So you talked about, and I know you are simple enough to try and make it look simple, but it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Talking about how you just got appointed, a pandemic was coming, and you figured out e-commerce, we need to bring it forward.
Yes.
Now, what that means is that it means in your team, it means there's a lot of critical, deep, creative thinking, right? So MTN talks about things like, connected, always on, open culture. All those lingo, most organizations have them. They have all those cool phrases that we throw around. But most organizations somehow still do not have that deep culture of creative thinking, of thinking outside the box, of moving fast and breaking things, of ensuring that you can actually just allow people from the ground up, innovate ideas, innovate products, and have it bubble up to the top from down, right? Listen to customers and then figure out things quickly. So the question I want to ask you is, as the MD of the group, especially given all these tech networking tools that exist today, how telecoms is already very standardized, because the thing is, it's like you're entering a sector where there is what you call traditional knowledge of how things have been done, but the world is also changing. How do you balance that idea of the world is changing constantly? I still have to innovate for the customer. I still have to provide leadership, but at the same time, I have to ensure that there's enough creativity in the team. There's not groupthink. We're not all thinking the same way. We're creative. Because the truth is, I'm sure you're not the only organization in the world of Zambia that was facing that same situation. But not everybody rolled out e-commerce quickly. Not everybody rolled out a mobile money recommendation. We have all different countries across the continent. Not everybody had the same growth in mobile money like Zambia had, or like mobile money had in Zambia. But so the question for me is, how did you foster that, ensuring that things are stable enough for everybody, ensuring that you're preserving some of the most important principles, but ensuring at the same time that there's creativity, there's no groupthink, people can be creative, people can know that they will not be penalized for making mistakes if they try something new, ensuring that there's a natural innovation culture in a big team?
Good question. And I don't think there's any simple way to answer it. Our environment is quite hectic, and it's also a very new environment. So I always like to describe it as we are flying this plane and we're building it at the same time. I always tell my team, but the fact of the matter is the demand is there and we have to rise up to the occasion. So it's quite a hectic task that we have before us. It was Henry Ford that said, you increase innovation, you overcome obstacles. All right. At the end of the day, the customer has a demand, you need to rise to the occasion. The only way to appease the expectations of the customer is to provide what the customer needs. So we are putting in the work, to be quite honest. It's tasking, but we are not alone in this journey. We have got a very big support structures around us. Number one, the partners that we work with also bring big support. We're not the only ones who are supporting the needs of these big customers. We work very closely with the banks. And the banks have been dealing in financial transactions and in the finance space from time immemorial. And we're not trying to be the banks. The banks are the banks. And so they support us a lot in terms of making sure that there's sufficient liquidity, that we're making the right kind of interest in trust accounts. They support us a lot in terms of supporting our agents and making sure that the operations on ground for agents are moving, cash availability, float availability, and so on and so forth. So we are not alone. They're such a big strategic partner for what we do, all right? We work very closely with insurance companies on the appetite for our insurance-driven product. And we are also not underwriters. So we require them to support us on our product IO. So they come in very instrumental where that's concerned. Another typical example are the PSPs, who in some aspects are also agents, because they have got flavors of services that they are able to receive cash and also offer float to customers. So it's about identifying the right kind of ecosystem. We do loans, but we work very closely with the likes of Jumo, who are experts in loan algorithms, and we work with the likes of the banks, who are the financiers. On the remittance front, we'll be working with Western Union. We work with MoneyGram, with Mama Money. We work with World Remit, Tunes. The list is endless. All these are partners who are working to provide a service. The government, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just recently, we're working very closely with them to support the diaspora in them being able to send money back home, to be able to execute their projects. You know, if you live in the UK, you're trying to build a house in Zambia, how do you securely send resources to make sure that none of your resources will go to waste, or there'll be theft or mismanagement of resources, and so on and so forth. So big partners, the building firms then come to work with us. Zambia National Building Society, Dangote Cement, Lafarge Cement, have all created apps where if you're not in Zambia, you're still able to purchase cement and take it to your plot without a middleman. They will carry on, they will carry out that entire cycle. So I'm just giving you a typical example that as tasking as this task is, and is a big responsibility because our product offering is quite diverse and is quite relevant for the now. We are not alone. We're working with a lot of partners who are making this a reality, be it the banks and so on and so forth. So it's tasking, yes, but we're by no means alone. The support structures are there. So we are equal to the task.
Komba, let's talk about competition. In the way innovation has evolved, and I say that as somebody who works in trade and tech, and who I believe is a leading thought leader on it, right? What you find out is that today, there is no clear distinction of what a competition looks like, right? You mentioned a number of partners, but each of those partners is also technically also a competition, right? Because these days, PSP companies become as big as telecoms companies. These days, banks, telecom companies are going into banking. Banks are trying to open, kind of want to open telecom orbs. The point is, the idea of growth, fast growth, big growth means that everyone is now a competition. Everyone is growing into every sector. How do you approach competition? I find that some people look at it as, I need to watching what the other guy is doing and cloning it out. And that's what people have been accused big tech of doing in the recent times, right? Cloning out every kind of innovation that people bring in. Some other people have said, oh, their approach is actually different. It's basically ignore the competition and just do your own work, bury your head in the work and just come up with new stuff. Some people have said, oh, it's not even any of those, right? It's a mixture of both. Like, how do you approach competition, one? And also, how do you ensure that you don't become competitors with those you should be collaborating with? So that's that clear distinction of ensuring that you're aware that there's competition and that everybody can become a competition at some point, but at the same time ensuring that you're not fighting the entire world, you're also collaborating where you should. So how do you strike that balance and how do you approach that?
Good question. Very, very good question. But I'll tell you, for Africa, we really need to work together to get Africa financially included. We've got a lot of work to do. It's always good to understand what the competition is doing so that you can check how much more innovative you can be. All right. In case you're lagging behind in a service that is really relevant to the customers that you're saving or that you're serving. But the conversation, in my view, is less a competitive one, more how can we help Africa get out of the situation it is in, leapfrog it to be a technology champion, a technology FinTech hub. I put up a post on my LinkedIn earlier this week. I say that for FinTech, the leaders and the center of the world is not UK, the USA, or Europe. It is Africa. Africa is making leaps and bounds where FinTech is concerned.
True.
Why? Because we are having to leapfrog on top of a lot of things that we never had because of the demand that our customers have. Suddenly today, you can Uber in Africa. Suddenly today, you can place an order for anything and it will be delivered to your doorstep. 3 years ago, it was utterly impossible, especially in my country, that you're going to be able to order a meal, pay online with no human contact. It will be delivered and you pick your meal, or you pick your groceries, or you pick your outfits, and so on and so forth. So we're leapfrogging a lot of the things that we're not able to do. Let me paint some context to you so that you understand. According to the GSMA, they're saying more than half of 282 million mobile money services operating around the world are located in sub-Saharan Africa alone. And today that they are around an estimated 100 million mobile money accounts in Africa. Over 40 million of those belong to MTN.
Can you say that, those two data again? Say that again, the data, the first one.
That today there are around an estimated 100 million mobile money accounts around Africa.
Wow. 100 million. Wow.
Yes. And over 40 million of those are MTN.
40%.
Yes, so MTN is almost 50 million mobile money subscribers across the world. But that is nowhere near where we're supposed to be. You can imagine.
We're continent of 1.2 billion.
It's nowhere near where we're supposed to be. Exactly. You understand? Exactly. So we've got quite a big opportunity that is not a competitor discussion. It's about financial inclusion. I just told you that MTN alone in Zambia has 4.5 million customers there odd, but our population is 18 million, right? So the penetration in terms of where we are supposed to be versus where we are, we have a lot of work to do between us, the PSPs, the competition, and so on and so forth. Africa is not poor. It's financially excluded. When you can when you can convince your grandmother to not keep her money, her nairas under her pillow, under the bed, and to choose to put them on a mobile phone and earn interest on that money, you would have saved Africa. That is the true context of what it is. We do not know the full extent of Africa's wealth because it's not electronic. We have to get people banked, that they'll be able to circulate the wealth in society, to earn interest on it, to multiply it. Then we'll be saving Africa. So it's not so much a competitive discussion. Yes, look over your shoulders only to see how far you've come. But the distance as to where you are versus where you are going is still big, and we still need to forge ahead to get the continent financially included. That would be my answer to your question.
At this point, I feel like saying that's all for this evening. I'm joking, but that was such a very powerful statement. That I set in context to how we should work together as a continent. And you bring me to the next important conversation, right? Which is FinTech in Africa. Because you set out some of the most interesting conversations around what's happening, who you're working with, you're partnering with, how we have to do more work around collaboration. Very vital, important conversation. So the question I'm going to ask you now is, what to you are the biggest developments you've seen in the FinTech space across Africa? And what do you think the FinTech tech in Africa is going to look like in the next 10 years? So maybe the way I'm thinking of it is, one, what are the biggest developments you've seen so far? Two, what are the biggest developments you see coming? And what do you, if you were going to set out a future of 10 years, what do you think that's going to look like?
That's a very good question. So there's good services that are there now that we still need to expand on. And I'll just go through some of them. Number one is crowdfunding. If you see Africa, there's a lot of manual, makeshift crowdfunding solutions that are available out there. That if you really, really created an opportunity for crowdfunding in Zambia, we like to call it village banking, that people will be able to create wealth and be able to sustain themselves. So this one is a very big one, and I think it's going to be a big ticket item and solution for the future. we're only scratching the surface. Remittance is also very big. Typical in Africa, we have got, almost all of us have got a relative that migrated out of Africa or migrated out of the country, but they still support members of the family. Black tax, we call it, right? And we're quite proud of our black tax, by the way. It's part of our culture. But when you leave home, you must send money back home to look after your family, your extended family, to develop your projects and so on and so forth, because eventually the expectation is that you may return home, okay? How do we ease remittance and getting money back home safely to be able to receive it, whether it's as e-money, to be able to invest it in the right kind of investment securely, be able to build your house, run that project, that home business that you want to enable? Those seamless solutions have to be there. It's beyond just sending money. It's once the money is sent, how does it then get securely channeled to whatever project you want it to be? So remittance, we're definitely scratching the surface and there's big opportunity. Another key ticket item is e-commerce and creating an Africa marketplace. I think there's a very big opportunity for us there. Today, there's no seamless way for me to shop in Nigeria as much as it is a seamless way for someone to shop from Nigeria into South Africa or into Zambia and buy a specific product and have it delivered to their doorstep. We need to make sure that Africa creates a marketplace and sort of harmonizes the whole logistic aspects to it, the payment aspect to it, the product aspect to it. That entire value chain and ecosystem can work more seamlessly. And we are trying to really create an African marketplace here at MTN. So it's a very big conversation that I feel that we are only scratching the surface. So those will be my top three in terms of what are some of the trends that need to be built upon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Komba. And I'm particularly excited about that. Someone who worked on the negotiation for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and someone invested in tech, it's a perfect fit for me, right? Because you're saying this is how we can use tech to build trade on the continent, how we can use tech to deepen integration on the economic integration of the continent. This is how we can use tech and mobile money to actually ensure that there is more interconnectivity, there's more business happening, there's more commerce happening, right? And like they say, when people do business, they don't fight. You know, like the more people do commerce, they don't go to war. So I'll take the conversation to the next conversation. And a million people, I'm sure, want to hear your view on this. So this week, the former Way CEO, Noam Badin, right, put out this blog post about him exiting Google and talked about how he felt like the big corporates is basically negative for innovation and for tech startup culture. Right? There's less incentive as against solving massive problem for the users. He talked about issues like feeling like ways could have grown better outside of Google than within Google. So all those questions about how big corporate culture cramples startup culture. Now, for someone like you who's running what you'd almost call a startup between the corporates, I'm curious to see what your perspective on that is, right? How do you keep your staff motivated when they could either pick something that gets them promoted or something that actually is incredibly innovative but risky? How do you ensure that people don't, your staff don't get too comfortable in, because like people will say, when you get into a company like MTN, you can just collect a salary for the rest of your life and you're good, just keep rising gradually. Like, how do you ensure that people are still hungry and people are still driven and all that? Yeah, just some of your thoughts around ensuring the startup innovation culture in a big corporate.
Yeah, you're asking me very nice questions. I'm actually enjoying this discussion. Because they're very realistic. Yeah, they're very realistic with the things that we're facing on a day-to-day, all right? We experience quite a bit of turnover in the fintech space with members of staff because it's such a new space and there's a lot of people who have amassed quite some great skills, that are required world over. And before it used to frustrate me and depress me and say, we work with this person 2-3 years, they become really good and they either move on to a bigger fintech or they also move on to set up a fintech of their own. But I changed my approach towards that and just accepted that, look, it is our time. We are developing future leaders of tomorrow who are actually going on to improve on our country, on the continent, and so on and so forth. So we must be happy to produce that kind of talent and also encourage them to evolve into better contributors to society. It has an impact on the organization because obviously we spend quite a bit in terms of training and making sure that these people come up to speed, but you can only hold them down so much. Some also tend to stay. I mean, I'm a good case in point of someone who has stayed in an organization over 12 years now, and remains quite motivated because of the kind of business that I work for. So where innovation is concerned, we have an open API, right? Which then makes it very easy for third parties to be able to integrate into our business. And what used to take, for example, 14 days to a month to be able to onboard a simple payment solution, a simple payments partner, can now be done in 48 hours to 24 hours just via our open API. And that keeps the team very engaged and very motivated because they stop spending so much time on mundane work, supporting partners getting on board. Partners can now simply onboard themselves and get integrated onto the mobile money platform or onto our FinTech platform. So we have got the richest ecosystem amongst the MNOs when it comes to the mobile money service that we offer. So you've also got to keep it going for the teams that are there, making sure that their responsibilities are not mundane and that they're also focusing on very innovative work that is actually impacting our environment and speaking into the needs that our customers have. So eventually, after they amass their talent, some of them will move on to bigger jobs and will be retained within the company for greater opportunity, case in point. And others will also just move on and set up their own startups. And they'll come back and integrate those same startups into your payments platform, thereby growing the ecosystem. So it's no love lost on either ways. It's all towards the cause of growing our African continent. We want to build innovation. So if it's coming from some of the members of our team, no issues. We are looking forward to that. But we also retain some very good talent within the business. And we grow that talent to go on to support the business into even more pressing areas or pressing markets.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Right,
I think you're talking on mute.
Yeah, no, I think the internet went off for a minute. Yeah, so that's fine. Thanks for that context and explaining that in the end everyone is building, right? Whether they need to go start their own startups, that in the end it's about building that ecosystem out. So let's talk about mobile money a bit, right? Mobile money has been incredibly successful in a number of African countries, right? With Kenya, with Zambia. You just mentioned earlier that about the great success with MTN Zambia. Mobile money customer, about 4.5 million users, 5 million users. I think last November was about 4.5 million. Now it's about 5 million users. All that great growth and that adoption has been great. And the potential for mobile money to even drive digital inclusion and ensure that more people are included. And the question I wanted to ask, in some other countries, it just has not taken off. It just has not stuck. There's been not as much stickability, right? Even though it has great promise, mobile phones are everywhere. So it makes sense that if you put money with more phones, it will go as far as phones have gone, right? So the question for me is, what do you think are some of the key factors you think will drive adoption rates for mobile money on the continent? What should we be doing differently in the countries that it hasn't picked up? And what should we do even in countries where it has picked up to ensure that there is more adoption? And how can we even leverage it on the AFCFTA, right, to ensure that there's also interoperability across countries, right? So MTN in Nigeria with MTN in Zambia or another network provider in Nigeria, all that, even all that work,
Okay, no, good question. We were there a couple of years ago, so I really, really understand the context of that question. I mean, it took a bit of a while for even Zambia operation to take off where mobile money was concerned. There's a couple of factors that really impact the success of a mobile money business. It's a stage at which an economy is at. Primarily it tends to come into markets as a product for the unbanked. So you need to really understand that demographic, your bank demographic to your unbanked demographic, and how you position the service to both the banked and the unbanked. They are the senders and then they are receivers, especially when you're just starting out. It's a send and receive service. Our mobile money started right at the basics as just a send and receive service before we started to grow our ecosystem. In order for you to be a success, you need a very strong distribution network. And you're required to invest quite a bit in terms of distribution. When we started out in our first year, we had less than 100 agents, the whole lot of Zambia. And these 100 agents were supporting a population of, I think by that time, we're about a 15 million, 16 million population in Zambia. We are now sitting at over 55,000 agents across the country. That investment was critical. So you find a lot of booths and kiosks plotted across the country because at any 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers or so, someone should be able to access float and should be able to access cash. So a distribution network is very critical to the success, and a solid one at that matter, to the success of mobile money. Number two,
distribution network.
Yes. Number two is to the level at which the regulator supports the initiative. If the conversation is government and regulator driven, it makes matters a whole lot more easier for the operators to operate in. I find that in markets where it has also not taken off, there's been a lot of sanctions and restrictions of what the fintech business can or cannot do, and some of those regulations tend to stifle or hinder growth. So you need a very good regulatory support structure, so to say. So yeah, so a good banking infrastructure and support integration between the banks and yourselves, because in many instances you'll be pulling money from the banks and you're putting that on the wallet and pushing it from the wallet onto the bank and vice versa. So the banks also come in very handy to support the whole liquidity journey for mobile money. And that also speaks into all the other types of partners and frameworks that you have to put in place. So that is very, very critical. So those are some of the very more practical examples. And then after that, once you would have gotten the basics right in terms of liquidity, you really need a good stack of advanced services. Beyond sending and receiving money, it must be a service that enables your customers and your partners to be able to use the float within the ecosystem. You should be able to pay your bills, to buy your goods and services, because it's a currency. We call it the yellow currency here in MTN, that with your phone, you should be able to carry out any form of payment, receive and send money. You shouldn't necessarily want to take the money out of the ecosystem. You should be able to keep it and carry out your day-to-day life with your phone, because it's actually a currency that you are creating. So that full-on ecosystem is very critical and important.
Fantastic. And I love how you ended it about talking about the stack of services, because in the end, what the customer cares about is services, right? Being able to build enough services on it. And I love how you said that the idea is not for people to take the money out. The idea is for them to keep using that money within the ecosystem. So I want to pay for my Komba. I want to do this. So I'm just going to ask you two more questions. I'm going to close this out because we'll drag this out for a bit, right? And Komba, I think we're going to have a long conversation after this about the AFCFT and how to use mobile money more specifically. But I'll ask you two quick questions. First is, if you were not the MD of FinTech in Zambia and you were going to build up a tech company, what would the tech company be doing? What sector would you play in? If you today had a green check, if a genie showed up and said, Komba, you've got a blank check to open to start up a tech company to solve one problem on the continent or whatever it is, what sector would you play and what kind of company would you build? So basically that's the way of saying, what do you think, what are you excited about outside of to build more out of what you're doing?
Yeah, that's very, very good question. And I think I've said the word over and over here. But I think for me, it would be e-commerce. Payments. I think it would be the payment space. I think that there's a very big gap where payments is concerned. We need to create more and more cashless societies and to be able to just turn around payments and enable e-payments, whether it's at the restaurant, it's shopping, for paying your suppliers, restocking, supply chain management system and so on and so forth. But just the enablement of payments. for me is a very big unexploited opportunity in Africa that we've got the opportunity to just close it up. The reason why platforms like WeChat are so successful in China, for example, is because they got the payments aspect to the business right. And so when you're into that WeChat world, there is nothing that you can't do. And the right partners are in there, the logistic companies and so on and so forth. So we should create a WeChat for Africa or support in the creation of that. But I believe that slot is being well taken care of by MTN again. So I'm definitely in the right environment. But yeah, that is ultimately the plan, that will be able to create this African marketplace. And we owe it to Africa and to ourselves, being the biggest MNO on the continent. We probably have got a better chance at doing something like that than anybody else. But it's a lot of work, and it's going to require a lot of support from different partners, because a lot of work that goes into putting together an outfit like that, we are not mainstream. So you need partners on the logistics side, technology enablement partners to be able to make the platforms work, and so on and so forth. The actual products themselves to be able to be put on the marketplace. So it's a lot that goes into it. But I think in terms of being platform providers, to being enablers to creating this African marketplace, no one is better positioned than ourselves.
Actually, the last question I'll ask you, right? When you're not doing all of this, solving problems, growing mobile money exponentially, doing all this very fantastic heavy duty work, how do you unwind? What do you do to relax? Do you watch movies like the rest of us? Do you read a book? Like, what do you do to unwind? How do you relax? How do you ensure you don't burn out?
I spend time with my family. So I have young kids, and young kids can be quite demanding. I had to lock myself here in my office to be able to have this call my home office. But I think that that's all I do. Unfortunately, between work, it's family. So I'm very family oriented, and I have 2 boys that I'm also trying to raise the right way amidst all this busy. So I try to dedicate as much time to family. And I'm African, so I've got also quite a big extended family. So I'm all spending time with my 2 kids. Then I'm checking on what my grandmother is doing, what my cousins are doing, aunties and uncles, are they coping well? And how else can we support and help them along the way as well? So just like you and me, we have a big family to support and look after. So between my kids and my family and my extended family, I think I have got my job cut out for me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I'll keep in touch, and I'm sure we'll do a lot of this kind of conversations again in the future.
This pleasure.
Like I said, this is Innovation Law Club Africa. We bring some of the most impressive conversations to you, bring you conversations with thought leaders like Komba here, and so that you can see what the future looks like, see what those that are building the future and what that future looks like. Thank you so much, Komba Malukutila. Got it this time. Yes.
You got it.
Thank you so much, Komba. And,
I'm going to try. It's Tola Onayemi.
Yes, you didn't get the pronunciation, but you tried. Tola Onayemi, but you're good. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation on this.
Thank you, Tola. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciated the discussion.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much to guys at ILCA. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.